I get the pleasure of introducing Josh Hicks, the founder of Plated. You guys heard a little bit about this from Brent earlier, and time at HBS, working through Shark Tank, exit strategy. I think what's really exciting about this is all the grit, perseverance, and obviously a lot of great food along the way as it's involved with Plated. So without further ado, welcome Josh to the stage.
All right. Is this working, I think? I don't really know if I should stand or sit. I'm going to stand. I'm sad that I missed the after party last night. I heard it was great. I'm jet lagged, probably not as out of it as a lot of the people here. I also missed what Brent said. Probably none of it's true. I think he thought that I was going to be sort of the entertainment and wake everybody up. So I'll try to do that. I don't know if I'm actually that entertaining though, so we'll see. I just wanted to tell you a bit about the Plated journey, try to make it entertaining, hopefully a little bit relevant for what you all are doing, and then leave some time for questions, because I always enjoy it more, and selfishly at least, it's more enjoyable if it's a back and forth and I'm not just talking at you for 20 minutes, which can be an awful long time. So, I'm Josh. Brent and I met at HBS. It sounds like you heard that. I met my co-founder, Nick, as well, who is living in sunny Southern California, which is more appealing the colder it gets here in the Northeast. So he's not here today, but we met at HBS as well and started Plated in 2012. So I'm going to tell you 3 stories that are hopefully entertaining and hopefully relevant, or at least one of the other. The first one is about the beginning of the company and some of the challenges. The second, I think you've heard a bunch about this, but sort of the power of existing customers, retention, how we thought about activating that big customer base, and hopefully some of the folks here have used the product. And then Shark Tank is always a fun story, and there's hopefully something relevant in there as well. So let me tell you a little bit about the beginning of the company. We started out just 2 guys on a couch. I mean, pretty classic startup story. 2 guys with a mountain of business school debt. We had no idea what we were doing, no real idea what we were getting into. We thought that it would be fun to build a company that had a physical product that was around food and healthy food, perishable, fresh food, not processed packaged food, and we just dove right in. We had an absolute beast of a time raising any money, different than the kinds of funds that you all are raising, but no one wanted to talk to us. Certainly no one wanted to write a check. So we started out by trying to build our own warehouses, because we were crazy, and that's partially what you do when you have negative dollars. So we ran around. I was building the website. Nick was actually running around New York City trying to convince somebody to lease a warehouse to us, which if you've ever done any kind of real estate deal, even just renting an apartment, you have some appreciation for. Not an easy task. I mean, 2 guys, sort of a balance sheet for the business that had a bank account that was literally 0. No, forget about revenue or anything, and we didn't even have a product at this point. We had a very terrible website. So getting a New York City landlord to lease a warehouse space to us was a pretty Herculean task. Somehow Nick did it. He convinced some guy, and he's more charismatic than I am. He convinced some guy to lease us the back corner of this warehouse, where we decided, since this was all we could get, and it wasn't refrigerated, and we were a food company, we would build our own refrigerated space. That is a terrible, terrible idea. I think that it's possible. There's a bunch of internet forums where largely sort of deer hunters and such, and I spent a lot of time in the South, so have some exposure to this, build these warehouses with, and you can kind of see it in the corner there, what are really sort of not quite industrial, but home air conditioning units. and a bunch of insulation, and you can kind of sort of turn this into a giant refrigerator. Well, that might work if you have all the right materials and you know what you're doing. It does not work. This is literally underground under a black asphalt parking lot in Queens, and this is August. So I don't think we ever got that room to come down below, I don't even know, maybe 55 degrees or something, which is nowhere near cold enough. We wasted about $20,000 that we really didn't have, went on to credit cards. And in the sort of attempt of this, Nick got pneumonia, ended up in the hospital, and I don't know how close to death he actually was, but he certainly looked like he was almost dead. I thought I had a picture of that in here, but that must have gotten lost. So anyway, we gave up on that. We moved on to the second attempt. We went and rented a refrigerated cargo container. That's what this is. These are the things that sort of seafood and whatnot get shipped around the world in. And went, and the same landlord actually, and I can't believe this guy was still willing to deal with us, sort of leased us a different, separate space. I think he must have just been having a hard time leasing these spaces. So this was on the riverbank in Brooklyn. So we get all excited. We've got some actual refrigeration. We finally convince a couple of other equally crazy entrepreneurs to invest a little bit of money, and we've got this whole grand plan, and it's going to be great, right? We're going to launch. The world's going to beat a path to our door. All the things we all think when we launch a new project. We convince a couple of relatively small sort of media sites to write a piece about us, and we're all geared up for this big launch. We also rebranded because we started with a sort of test brand. So we were going to unveil Plated to the world and have this big launch, and it was going to be exciting, and everything was great. This was all planned for Monday, October, I think, like 28th. So the week leading up to that, we're doing all the things you got to do, getting inventory, trying to make sure the website is going to work, all these things. And in the background, just life is going on. We're not really paying attention. We're not watching the news. But by Sunday, it becomes clear that there's a storm that everybody's talking about that seems like it's going to be real, and it turns out to be Hurricane Sandy. You can see the riverbank back there. Like, this is actually maybe 50 feet from the river. We came within probably 2 inches of being flooded out of business before it ever started. And the only thing that kept these things weigh roughly a ton. The only thing that kept this thing from floating into the river, which we would have been on the hook for and would have absolutely bankrupted us, was a 240-volt locking plug, which is how these things run. So there was the business owner so you can't really tell, but these are truck bays. There's one truck bay between this and the river. The business owner, the guy who owned the trucking company that was between us and the river, was crazy and rode out the storm in his trailer on the riverbank. And he tells me that he's watching the river surge in and out and pick this thing up and almost pull it out to sea. There's a lot to unpack there, but in any case, almost flooded out of business. This turned out to be, an equally terrible idea, trying to rely on these cargo containers and everything else. We couldn't ship, obviously. The media that we had gotten actually ran in DC, New York, and Boston. So we had some orders that came in both DC and up here, because there wasn't, much of an impact. I mean, I know there's rain and stuff, but I don't think the flooding sort of hit either of the cities all that badly. So in any case, we're just sort of looking around thinking, it's over. How do we deal with this? It was a crazy time. And I think other than just being a fun story in hindsight, maybe the lesson here that is hopefully applicable for people is reinventing the wheel is a really stupid idea. There's a lot of things that are already solved. I think we must have heard this at business school somewhere along the line. I don't think I really properly internalized it until down the road. But if someone's built the solution or a solution to the problem you're trying to solve, just use it. And relatedly, hire people who actually know what they're doing. Now, in our defense a little bit, we couldn't really do this at that point in time, at least the hiring part. But trying to build a warehouse was a really sort of dumb idea. I mean, this is what happens when you let engineers try to solve everything. I think they can build everything, and they should rebuild everything. So I think as applicable to you all, you're already doing this. You're here. EverTrue is obviously doing a phenomenal job. Use the tools that exist. Don't reinvent that wheel. And there's a lot of folks around that know what they're doing, and Brent did not pay me to say that. Although I'm going to make him buy me a drink later. So let me talk a little bit about customers now. This is probably more relevant and probably less entertaining. We were a subscription business. For those that may not know, and sorry, I should have started with this, we delivered all the ingredients you needed in the exact portions to your door with the recipe cards, recipe content to help you cook. So you'd get a weekly delivery, it was subscription, and it would have all the portion ingredients, so you didn't have a giant jar of spice or 2 pounds of kale or whatever it was left over at the end of the week. And the recipe content, chef design content, so that hopefully we were helping you to cook better and enjoy the product that you were making more than certainly either of us were able to make without some real help. So the business was built on subscription and repeat customers. That was the only way that business worked. Very few businesses work on sort of one-time customers. I mean, you can kind of look at whether it's, I don't know, the mattress companies, the Caspers of the world now, or I'm not even sure, maybe the diamond companies, Blue Nile and some of these. They have built pretty good businesses on one-time, very large purchases. But even there, the businesses don't get huge. So I would argue that repeat customers are kind of the key to everything, even for those businesses. I mean, hopefully nobody's buying too many engagement rings, but repeat is good. And Blue Nile obviously tries to sell you diamonds for a lot of things. So when we looked at, and this is at least roughly real data, when we looked at sort of first-time versus repeat customers, there's a couple of highlights to pull out of here, and I'm gonna try to get through this. So if there's any questions, we can do that. But customer acquisition cost. So for us, we were spending a lot on Facebook and Google and all the other kind of standard channels, all the ads everybody sees. Our acquisition cost for first-time customers was pretty high. It worked. We always, roughly were able to manage to. If we thought we were going to make $100 from you in the first year, we'd spend $30 to get you to sign up on Facebook, but it was still a lot of money. And to be fair, the number was actually more like $200 that we were spending on Facebook. The magic here, which seems really obvious after you put it on a page, but getting a customer who had quit or churned or canceled to reactivate ended up costing like $15. And the magic of that was that they actually behaved almost identical to a like new customer. So after we kind of figured that out, and it all sort of seems super obvious in hindsight, we said, well, we should really be paying a lot more attention to our both existing and former customers. Over time, that pool became very big, and I imagine looks similar to a lot of the sort of fundraising efforts that you all are leading. And people turn these things off for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, sometimes it was that they didn't like the service or didn't fit in their lifestyle, but honestly, that was, probably 1/4 of the overall reasons. There was a lot of, I went on vacation for 2 weeks, or, I got really busy and I turned it off and I forgot, or whatever it was. So there was a lot of value in reactivating those people. And sort of the spend number there kind of says it. The other thing about the repeat customers, existing customers, that was really, really powerful was word of mouth. Again, may seem obvious, but something like 40% of our new customers came from other customers. And those are just the ones we could track, right? Those are the ones the people that were using the referral codes. So there was almost certainly a lot more, word of mouth that was happening that we just, couldn't attribute. So anyway, your customers are really your most powerful, best asset. And it applies to all of them, not just the best, not just the top of the pyramid. I think there's a lot of value there to unlock. I know for us, we did a very poor job of that for a long time because we were so focused on new customers. It seemed anyway like the easier thing, like the obvious thing, and we would just pour money into Facebook and do all the media and the stuff that, I don't know, in some ways was sexier than sort of worrying about, drip email campaigns with a $5 coupon versus a $15 coupon and the sort of, the small sort of optimizations. Those turned out to be more powerful. But you do have to worry about first-time customers at some point. There's a lot of lessons, in how to acquire customers. I don't know how scalable this is. You only get to do it once. It's not for everybody, but it is a fun story. We did go on to Shark Tank. We actually filmed this 9 months into the business, so we were very new and young, and you can tell I have no gray hair in these pictures, which my team always like to point out to me. We went on. It was a phenomenal experience. Get asked all the time, which is still a little surprising to me. Was it worth it, or some version of that? It drove a tremendous amount of traffic, which was a lot of fun and hugely valuable to the business. I think the big lesson coming out of this, though, was the personalization. And I know, I heard it, with the sort of last group up here. Turns out to matter a lot. How you talk to people. For us, the product, making sure that we had, the flexibility for people to order how they wanted, what they wanted, which on the back end, operationally, was very complicated and was a differentiator for us against our competitors, but turned out to be, I think, one of the most important things we did in terms of, making the business succeed. So that personalization, even with the tremendous amount of traffic that came from efforts like this, was really, really critical. Something like when we did it, at least, and I think now that they've moved it from Friday night to Sunday night, the numbers have come down a little bit. It was 11 million households, which is 10% of the country, watches this live, which, by the way, was terrifying. It drove a lot of traffic, right? It was great. And I don't think we did a very good job at this point, because it was pretty early in the company, at that personalization and sort of really speaking to people in a way that captured their attention. We should have done a better job. That was one of the many, many takeaways from that, other than, there's sort of a lot of suggestions and a lot of advice, but at least in some cases, it's worth, throwing those out the window. We got a lot of really strong conflicting opinions about whether we should or shouldn't go on. Like, this was at a time where there weren't a lot of bigger companies, venture-backed companies that were going on the show. And we had some investors that thought it was silly and we shouldn't do it and a waste of time and this, that, and the other. But it turned out to be phenomenally helpful for us, and still one of the things that people ask about today, if not the biggest sort of brand awareness builder that we ever did. So I think I have just done that's not me. A terrible job of leaving time for questions. I don't know if there's anything burning, or if I've even got time, or I'm going to get thrown off stage here, but I'll be around if anybody does want to talk, and thank you.